And I was going to start by asking you about where you grew up and what it was like, but you had suggested starting with a little bit, or a lot earlier than that.
Well,
a little bit about ancestry.
both of those things will be involved. My first memories were, first place I remember living in was on Fifth Avenue, but that was Fifth Avenue, Brooklyn. And there was a elevated train that was kind of nice. It would be open on the platforms. You could ride it to Coney Island. And we were on the wrong side of the tracks, but it was a working class neighborhood on one side, and the other part was Park Slope, the beginning of Park Slope, which even then had those brownstones. So they were built, I don't think, these are the 1920s. I was born in 1923, and I went to school. I started school in that neighborhood.
What street were you on?
We were between 1st and 2nd Street. I think it was 300 Fifth Avenue. And most of the working class people were Italian. And the people in the Park Slope was sort of, I would guess, upwardly mobile, old Americans mostly. Or new, you know what I mean. So my parents were immigrants who immigrated to America before the First World War from Galicia, which is spelt in English Galicia, I think from the Spanish province because it was Habsburg. They came from Austria-Hungary, Österreich-Ungarn, which later dissolved into Yugoslavia, Austria-Hungary, and now is just dissolving into everything else. My father came from the Polish part of Galicia. See, the Austro-Hungarian Empire had a lot of nationalities in it. And the Austrians were the Germans, they were the rulers, and the emperor was Franz Joseph. He was an emperor until the end of the war. Then he was nothing, I guess. I don't know what happened. I don't remember what happened to him. And if you want to read about that war, there's a wonderful book called The Good Soldier, Schweik, written by a Czech anarchist, which has the most wonderful ending. I'm wandering, but you know, we Jews, we wander. And the book ends, finally gets drafted into the Austrian army. They were the Central Powers, Austria, Germany, and Turkey. And the book opens with someone coming into this bar and saying, Ferdinand has been shot. So Schweik says, which Ferdinand is that? Is that the guy that runs the pet store over the bridge, or is it the grocer down the block? Well, then they find out it's the Crown Prince of Austria-Hungary. So he decides to enlist immediately, and he happens to have a broken leg, so he's in a wheelchair and with his crutches, and he goes down to the recruiting office, and he goes inside and he shouts, "On to Belgrade!" And they look at him and they write him down. They classify him as an idiot, and he goes away for a long time. But later he gets drafted and he has many adventures. I recommend the book.
When did you first encounter the book?
Late. I mean, after probably in the 1940s or later, when there was another war. But the book ends in the most marvelous way. He's on the Eastern Front, and they're fighting the Russians. The Austrians are somewhere in Poland, I guess. And they're all, the soldiers are sort of in between battles, and the soldiers of both sides are bathing in this large lake. So suddenly the battle resumes, and everyone grabs their uniforms that are lying there. And Schweik just happens to grab a Russian uniform. So he gets captured by his own troops, and he spends the rest of the war as a prisoner in his own country, which is probably the best place to be. So to get back to my parents, my father sort of avoided World War I. There was a draft here by having 5 feet. But what they didn't avoid was the poverty of immigrants in America. And I guess Galicia, to me, was sort of the Appalachia of Eastern Europe. And so there was a lot of immigration there to America, looking for jobs and better conditions, as they say. And my mother came from the eastern part of Galicia. My father was from the Polish part, and the eastern part of Galicia was actually Ukrainian, which I found out just recently. Although I remember when my mother was leaving the planet, she suddenly started to talk in Ukrainian. She was out of it. And I think the Western Galicians, where my father came from, were sort of dour, as they say in Scotland. And the Ukrainians have, I just read it today again, I was reading about Ukraine just to refurbish my mind, have a gay attitude, and they're musical. And my mother was always singing, and she came from a small village. There were only a few Jews there. They were the merchants to the farmers. And she was always singing, and she loved flowers. I remember that. So they both came here as teenagers, I guess, probably in their late teens. And my mother's parents were rag pickers. You know, that's an old traditional Jewish trade. And my father entered the clothing industry, which then was like 100% sweatshop. So he was also, I discovered much later that he was involved in some of the early strikes where the buses would get gangsters, some of them Jewish, some not, to beat up the strikers. And he was arrested by the cops once, my father. So he didn't think that was anything to report, but I thought it was better. I was proud that he was in that collection. And so that was my parents. And then, as every immigrant wants to advance themselves, and particularly Jewish immigrants, he started a store, luggage store, which one of my uncles had a luggage factory, and he sort of helped him start it. And it was the Depression time by then, 1929. So he failed 3 times in 3 different places. And then he spent the rest of his life as a working life as a machine operator in clothing shops. I spent one summer in one of those shops. I'll tell you about that later. It was during the war, and I kept. Later is right now. I guess it's later than I said I would tell it to you. So, and they were making these beautiful woolen khaki coats for the U.S. soldiers. I always get that mixed up. Our and their in the U.S. For their soldiers, these were marvelously made, and my job was to bring the different materials to the people, to the pocket makers, to the people who put buttons on, and so on. And they were always on my back because they were paid by the piece. That's a way to make workers speed themselves up to exhaustion. As a matter of fact, one of my cartoons is about the piecework, and there's the guy who makes more money than anyone else, but no one will sit next to him because he doesn't take time out to go to the toilet. He does it right where he's sitting. But he has the highest salary. So, where were we? So, that was my father, and What was the question?
Well, what was it like for you growing up?
Oh, well, I knew none of this, of course, as I was growing up. There was one incident, there were two incidents that I'll report that I remember. Three. One, supposedly, no, there was a lot of incidents. There was a movie house we used to go to that was in an open lot. That was the only thing there. And I think it was called, forget what, it'll come back to me. It's not the Annex, no. It was called anyway, I remember going to silent movies like for a nickel, and I remember you would be able to see the fire. We had color because they put an image, glass image, you could see color fire, to the movies. And I think I was offered a cigarette there when I was about 5 years old by one of my friends. And it was something. So the other, I appeared on stage for the first time. We had, movies were a big deal. I remember I drank my first Coca-Cola at the movies. They would give it to you free. Anything to get you in, and they would give out plates, and it was amateur night. And I guess I was about 5, and my mother ended me in the amateur. I had black velvet shorts, I remember that. And do you want to see my performance?
Sure.
Yeah, here's what it is. All right. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Do you want to get this on camera? I'm on stage, and I'm...
Just a minute. I don't have your whole body in here. So can you go back?
And it's my...
maybe I better go back.
You could bend it, and it's my...
I can't get the whole...
It's my turn to perform, and this is what I did.
Wait, I can't get your whole body in. Wait, let me try to zoom.
I'm already warmed up.
I know, but I can't get it on the camera. Your whole body, you have to move back.
I have to go back?
Well, no, I have to, let me go back. We can't get you home. Here. No, come closer.
Boy, what people will do to get it.
Yeah, come closer. I can get your whole body now. Yeah, come a little closer now.
Yeah?
All right, now
Because you better get this because,
all right, now,
it's not that easy to capture
back.
the nuances in it.
All right, just back a little more, and
so
I'll get your whole
why
body.
don't you announce me, and now...
All right, back, Tuli. I can't see your foot. That's the important
And
thing.
now, this is so...
All right, and now,
that was my Christian
4
name.
years old, we go back in time. All right, Jeffrey, announce him.
And now, you announce it, and now, Norman Kupferberg.
And now, Norman Kupferberg.
4 years of age. No, don't come forward. I can't get your whole body.
Oh, all right.
All right, now I got your whole body. Okay.
All right, you got it?
And now 4 years of age.
Okay. And of course, I was so cute that I won the prize, and I'm sure the adults must have been cursing me in that contest must have been cursing me. So where were we? So that was my stage debut.
Did you do other, were you involved in music or writing or performing
No,
while you were at school?
my parents, when I got to, my parents would listen to music. They had the Victrola. And my mother would sing a lot, and later on I listened to radio a lot, but they never sent me to learn an instrument. But what about you?
Yeah, I had
Did you
piano
go
lessons.
Yeah, I could have
Third
used
Street
that, I
Music
guess.
School.
So, but when I was in grade school, we moved to Manhattan, to Yorkville, which was a Central European neighborhood. Very mixed ethnicity, so I didn't grow up in a Jewish ghetto, which was an advantage. There were some Jews that were merchants, but there were Czechs, Slovaks, a few Russians, Italians, Germans, Irish, and there were even some Americans in the class, Hungarians, I remember. So that was an advantage, actually. And
Where was that?
it was, we lived on East 72nd Street in the school, between First and York Avenue. and the school was on 70th Street and First Avenue. It was a very old school, and it had a band, and there was it had its own band, there was a lot of music there. And we had music appreciation maybe twice a week, and let's see, we learned the melodies that went by this. This is the way we went. Barcarolle by tales of Hoffman, written by Offenbach, Bach, Bach. So we learned a lot of songs like that, and I like that. And next to the school, just down the block, a few buildings away, was a settlement house for deprived youth, for working class youth. It was called Lenox Hill Settlement, still there, I think. And they had a swimming pool there, which was very unusual. So we had swimming once a week at least. We had physical training through a PT. That was good. I think they've sort of eliminated that now in schools. That's why part of the obesity problem, but the rest is McDonald's. But so we were entered in a. I remember one tryout, one race there at the pool, which sort of influenced me. There were like 5 of us in the pool, and we were all racing to see, I guess, who would be part of the team that went up to City College for the PSAL Public School Athletic League Championship. And we were so close together that the swimming coach, Mr. O'Brien, just went over like this. He went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because he couldn't tell who was finished first. So that gave me an idea about competition and how subject to fate it was. And by now, I'm smart enough to hate all competitive sports. It's just practice for guerrilla warfare in the capitalist world, and it's pre-training for real warfare. So anyway, I went up to one of the, I think we went up there, and somehow in my event was, we got there too late, so we didn't play. So we finished second, I think, among all the schools, and we got this cup, and I was told to write would I write a poem for the event. So I remember a couple of lines. It was Public School 82, and they went da-da-da-da, they fought, or they fought for you, and they brought that cup to 82. And that so enthralled me to get all of that praise that I have been ruined ever since.
Were you writing poetry regularly at all?
Now?
At that time?
At that time? No, not until I got to high school, I think, or college. I really.
What inspired you in that direction?
Memories of all the applause I got for bringing that cup to 82. I guess I had an English minor in college, and there was a magazine called Pulse that was published the works of people in all the city colleges, and one of the few short stories and the best I ever wrote or will ever write, I went into that magazine. We could read it sometime. It was about a working class kid during World War II. And next question. Oh, so we're going. So I want to go a little bit more into the Hasidic part of my upbringing, or the lack of it, or the drifting from it. And I realize now I'm reading about a housing project in England that was in the East End, in London's East End, and it was called the Rothschild Project, and it was for working class people. Most of them were Jews in the East End. And how they, the generation that was born here, just how they drifted as each generation, the first generation, second, they lost, as is natural, they lost contact with the old cultures. So I realize now that, look back, I sort of accepted whatever was taught me in school, and that's how the culture transmitted itself to these people, young kids in England, and to me. So, but my grandparents were extremely religious. I knew, I never knew my grandfathers. They had both died before when I was a small kid, and I remember my mother's mother was a very nice woman. She was dying of breast cancer when I knew her. But my father's mother, my father came, he said, from a family of where there were 16 children. Most of them were gone by the time. I guess there was high infant mortality rate, but I did have 6 uncles and aunts and lots of cousins living here. Boy, they really, those Jews really went at it. Hasidim do that now too, and they don't believe in any kind of birth.
A commandment to be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, be a fruit and multiply.
No.
No, how can you be a fruit and multiply? You can adopt. So,
Did you grow up with siblings?
I had an older sister who thought she was my mother, so that created some problems. But my mother was quite kind. My father was sort of a little reserved and far removed. But I remember we were close. We would visit our relatives on weekends, and we lived in Borough Park at this time. And I remember I was whistling once. My grandmother, my father's mother, never learned English. It was common. And I was whistling once in her presence, and she said to me in Yiddish, a Yiddish Bucher pfeift nicht. A Jewish boy doesn't whistle. So I thought to myself, oy gewalt. I thought in Yiddish. What else doesn't a Jewish boy do? So I soon found out what else a Jewish boy doesn't do, but I did it anyway. And then the new Jewish boys did it over and over again. So, and they were extremely religious, and my parents sort of broke with that because it stopped you from integrating into being part of American society, and you can see it today among the Hasidim. They're welcome to it, though, because it has, not that I would want to do it, but it has its advantages. I remember meeting a Jewish psychologist in the village in the 40s, maybe, or 50s, and his clients were Hasidim. He belonged to some Jewish agency, and I said, wow, they must have a lot of problems, right, because of all these religions. He said, au contraire, they know their life is all planned for them. They know exactly what they should do. They have no doubts, except the few that became his clients. But so that that's why things like that persist, like the Amish and the Hasidim and other sects and communities, because what America could use a lot of more of is community, but depends on the kind of community that you want. And
in addition to breaking with the cultural traditions, were politics discussed in your household?
Oh yeah,
was there
because
radical politics.
Yeah, because 1929, I was 6 years old. The Great Depression came. My father's store fails one by one, I can remember once, we weren't on welfare, but relief as it was called then, but we were close to it. And I remember my mother throwing the icebox door open and saying, "See, Norman, tell your father we need some money." And the bank failed, but he got some money back. I remember standing on line. The bank failed for a while. They got most of it back, I guess, in the end. Bank holiday. And the communists and socialists and anarchists took advantage of this horrible period in America, and politics were on everyone's mind. And I remember in Borough Park, like, this must have been in the late 30s even, there were communist communist little rooms all over Brooklyn, and I remember being taken to a communist meeting in a small two-family house. Upstairs there was a kind of room. Maybe it wasn't, maybe a small place and small room, and this was for people of the neighborhood. So politics was on everybody's mind, and there's one story comes to my mind that Franklin Roosevelt was always presented as a great hero, but he wasn't my hero, and because he probably saved America from becoming socialist. And